Sometimes I catch myself staring at the ceiling long after the lights have gone out, feeling a weight that's hard to explain. A heaviness that's less about exhaustion and more about something quietly fading inside me. It's not the tiredness that comes from pulling late nights or skipping a workout. It's something subtler, a slow and silent erosion of energy I didn't even realize was happening. Creeps in, almost invisible at first, until one day you notice you're not driving your life anymore but merely being swept along by it. That's the place I found myself, where the days blurred into each other, and I was no longer the one calling the shots. I remember the mornings, when every plan felt like it was set by someone else, or by the clock, not because I'd chosen them. Meetings, deadlines, obligations. They stacked up like a pile of dominoes I couldn't push over. Instead, they just pressed down on me one after another. I'd react because I had to, not because I wanted to. It was subtle at first. Missing a workout here, delaying a decision there. But then that silence inside me grew louder, speaking through a dullness I couldn't shake. Something was draining, and I was powerless to stop it. There was no dramatic event to point to, no sudden trauma or burnout. I wasn't struggling with sleep or old age. I felt fine on the outside, but inside, I was locked in a quiet surrender I didn't even understand. It was like my body and mind were having a conversation I wasn't part of. A wordless agreement to settle for less energy, less spark, less drive. And the strangest part? I didn't even realize this silent corrosion was happening until the apathy became impossible to ignore. I just can't get going. I confessed one evening to a close friend during a rare moment of honesty. It's like I'm existing in this fog, and no matter how hard I try, I can't make things happen. He looked at me with that knowing look, the kind that says, I see it too, without judging or offering empty advice. And in his eyes, I saw the reflection of the same struggle he'd battled. A slow drain not caused by circumstance, but by a deeper disconnect from control, from being active in steering one's own course. What haunted us both was the realization that we had become passengers in our own stories. The pressure wasn't just external. It had seeped inside us, reshaping how our bodies worked, how our brains read the world, how our muscles and hormones responded. We were caught in a loop of reaction, reacting to schedules, reacting to other people's demands, reacting to challenges instead of meeting them head-on. And over time, this mode of existence rewired something fundamental inside us, dimming our energy and muffling our will. It's strange because nobody tells you this journey exists. Society applauds endurance and the ability to handle pressure. We brag about how little we sleep or how many tasks we juggle simultaneously. But beneath the surface, there's a quiet truth no one talks about. When you live in constant response mode, your body adapts by dialing down your inner engine, not as a punishment but as a survival mechanism. Your system senses you're not really in charge, so it conserves energy, thinking, why waste fuel if the driver isn't even steering? When I first came face to face with this reality, I felt a mix of frustration and relief. Frustration because I'd been unknowingly convincing myself that my fading energy was just life being life, something unavoidable. Relief because finally, there was a reason behind the fog, a pattern to what felt like random emptiness. That's when I started paying attention. Not just to what I was doing but how I was doing it, where my energy was leaking away, and where I had let go of control without even noticing. We've all heard the cliché about taking control of our lives, but this was different. It wasn't about forcing myself to be stronger or more disciplined. It was about uncovering that quiet, relentless pattern that saps energy, the endless cycle of reacting instead of deciding, adjusting instead of leading, submitting rather than owning. It's a pattern so subtle it slips by unnoticed every day but builds up, shaping your body's chemistry, your mood, your drive. It's the silent thief of masculine energy that hides in routine and obligation, in the small moments where you say yes when you want to say no, or hand over the reins because it seems easier. And yet, beneath all that, there remained a spark, a part of me that refused to accept the slow fade into low power, that whispered it's possible to reset the rhythm, to reclaim the spark, to ask for more than just survival. This spark wasn't about grand gestures or rebellion. It was quiet, steady, the kind that says, I want to lead again. I want to be the one who decides. It was the beginning of a journey back to myself, even before I knew how or where to start. As I looked deeper, I realized the key wasn't to fight the world but to realign with something much more intimate, reconnecting with my own sense of control, choice, and space. It became clear that to restore the energy I'd lost, I needed to acknowledge not just the outer demands but the internal surrender that had taken root. That's where this journey begins, not with a dramatic overhaul, but with a quiet awareness of the pattern, a recognition of what the body registers beneath the noise, and a willingness to gently reclaim the driver's seat. Maybe you're feeling it too, this subtle drain that shows up not in exhaustion but in a persistent dullness, in days that run together, in choices that feel more like obligations. Maybe you sense that something's changed inside you, that you're no longer the one setting the pace. If so, know this, you're not alone, and this feeling isn't your fault. There is a pathway back, and it starts with noticing the quiet pattern that's been waiting to be named. From here, the real work begins, not to wrest control from the world, but to find it again within ourselves. I recall a time when an unexpected conversation reshaped how I understood the subtle forces sapping my vitality. It happened during a late afternoon at a quiet cafe, the kind where the hum of chatter blends with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. My friend leaned in, lowering his voice as he described a phenomenon he'd noticed among men close to our age. Not exhaustion from effort or stress alone, but a kind of internal signal that something deeper was off. He called it the energy threshold, a point where the body's natural drive peters out because it senses a lack of meaningful agency. The idea caught me off guard. I'd been chasing physical remedies, trying everything from supplements to more sleep routines. Yet the lethargy persisted. Hearing him articulate this threshold awakened me to a facet I hadn't considered, that my body wasn't just tired. It was adapting to an environment in which I'd stopped asserting myself in subtle but profound ways. That day marked the beginning of a shift in how I approach daily life. Instead of just pushing through tasks, I started paying attention to moments when decisions were made on my behalf or when I fell into passive patterns, like nodding along in meetings without contributing or defaulting to habits dictated by others. This awareness uncovered that these small instances piled up, establishing a pattern my body read as low priority. Like a plant receiving less sunlight gradually withering, my system softened its output because it assumed the efforts wouldn't yield growth. Interestingly, this isn't about sheer willpower or brute strength. It's more nuanced, as if my physiology was engaged in a dialogue with my environment, constantly testing whether investing energy would make a difference. When I stayed silent in discussions instead of voicing opinions, or avoided initiating plans because it felt safer, my body dimmed its internal fuel gauge, interpreting these choices as cues that my input was dispensable. On a crisp morning, as I sat watching the city stir awake, I realized how much of this dynamic played out beneath my awareness. Simple rituals, like choosing the route I'd take or when to break for a pause, became battlegrounds where I confronted the tension between passivity and control. Each decision reclaimed was like reclaiming a thread of energy previously surrendered. I felt pockets of vigor returning, not a dramatic surge, but a steady hum growing stronger. One vivid scene remains etched in my memory. I was standing in a crowded subway, surrounded by people glued to their phones, their faces etched with fatigue. I caught my reflection in a window, staring back at someone whose shoulders carried the weight of silent acquiescence. At that moment, I vowed to shift from being a passive observer of my own story to its author. I knew this wouldn't be instantaneous. It required rebuilding from foundational habits, recalibrating the mental signals I was sending to my body. This experience wasn't isolated. My coworker shared how he recognized the signs within his own routine. Perpetual compliance without input at his job left him depleted. But when he began carving space for personal choices, like adjusting his schedule or prioritizing creative projects, he noticed a rebound in his capacity and enthusiasm. The message became clear. Autonomy fuels masculine energy in a way no external stimulant can replicate. Let me share how this played out on an ordinary evening when I was tempted to slump into passive scrolling on my phone instead of pursuing a passion project. The pull to disengage was strong, a familiar refuge from decision fatigue. Yet, I reminded myself that this very surrender was reinforcing that internal pattern. Choosing to turn off the screen and write, even for just 20 minutes, felt like a tiny rebellion, yet it sent a powerful signal to my brain, saying, here is control, here is choice. That moment was a breakthrough. It reminded me that energy rebounds through intentional acts, however small. The science behind all this began to make sense as I explored how neurochemistry and hormonal responses are tied closely to perceived control. My brain's dopamine circuits, responsible for motivation and reward, respond to opportunities for agency. By resigning to mere reaction, those pathways weaken, diminishing the drive. Conversely, when I asserted small choices regularly, those circuits reactivated, enhancing vitality naturally. Now, consider how this applies when you face a day filled with imposed deadlines, unsolicited advice, and external pressures. These aren't just hurdles. They subtly signal your body that you are navigating a course not of your own choosing. When that happens persistently, your internal engine downshifts, favoring conservation over output. But the resolution lies in identifying where you can assert your preferences, even incrementally, reclaiming lost ground and rekindling the dormant power within. There's another crucial layer often overlooked: emotional resonance. When I began asserting control, I noticed my mood lifted alongside physical energy. It was as if mental autonomy stirred something primal, rooted in a fundamental need for purpose. My body responded not just to the physical act of choosing, but to the emotional reaffirmation of being valued and heard, primarily by myself. One afternoon, I experimented by rearranging my workspace without external input. It was a small act but profoundly satisfying. The simple gesture echoed internally, reinforcing my authority over my environment. These small victories were like rivulets feeding a river, gradually restoring flow to parts of me that had gone stagnant. During this phase, I confronted an uncomfortable truth. The habitual yielding to external demands was often cloaked as cooperation or politeness, masking a deeper internal withdrawal. Recognizing this helped me navigate relationships and responsibilities with renewed clarity, balancing respect with self-advocacy. This balance became a linchpin in restoring the natural rhythm of my energy. Reflecting now, I see how the absence of control isn't merely a psychological state but an embodied experience, woven tightly into how our systems manage energy and resilience. It's like a silent conductor directing a symphony, and when that conductor steps back, the music dims. Yet, I discovered that stepping back into the podium, taking the baton again, reignites the orchestra, bringing back harmony between mind, body, and spirit. The journey continues, but with newfound respect for these subtle mechanisms at play. By tuning in to the signals and embracing opportunities to lead myself, I'm learning to reclaim not only energy but a deeper sense of purpose and belonging within my own life. And I invite you to explore those spaces within yours, where small choices can awaken dormant power waiting patiently beneath the surface. There was a particular evening etched in my memory that deepened my understanding of how subtle shifts in authority over daily choices impact our vitality. I had committed to joining a local community workshop focusing on leadership, not because I sought accolades, but from a whisper inside nudging me towards reclaiming personal sovereignty. Arriving there, the room pulsed with anticipation, a gathering of men from diverse backgrounds sharing stories marked by fatigue and resignation. What struck me wasn't just their words, but how many admitted to feeling trapped in routines not of their own making, as if their wrists were bound by invisible ties woven from habits and expectations. During a breakout session, I listened intently as one participant shared a narrative about his mornings. He described habitually hitting the snooze button multiple times before reluctantly rising, surrendering precious moments to an autopilot routine designed by distant imperatives. His voice carried regret and a surprising vulnerability, as he confessed that by the time he was awake, much of his day's path had been charted without his input. This admission resonated deeply, acting as a mirror reflecting my own muted acquiescence to externally imposed rhythms. It was clear that the daily forfeiture of small decisions, the selection of when to wake, how to start the day, injects a persistent undercurrent of passivity that seeps into broader facets of existence. Later, an exercise in the workshop challenged us to identify a recent situation when we felt disempowered and dissect the choices involved. As I traced back my steps, I recognized how many instances of go along to get along had accumulated like a low rumble beneath my consciousness, sapping my spiritedness. One revelation emerged with startling clarity: the relentless postponement of initiating any significant change because the ease of compliance disguised the slow erosion of self-direction. It wasn't antagonism I needed, but deliberate engagement in steering my path. On the way home that night, the city lights flickering past my car window seemed to mimic the flickering of resolve reigniting inside me. I thought about a former colleague who once described his life as a series of reactive steps: responding to crises, adapting to policies, adjusting to others' demands, with no proactive leaps. This phrase took root in my mind, highlighting how distinct the quality of movement is when we act from choice instead of reaction. His language painted a fragile dance on shifting sand, whereas the proactive approach felt like solid ground, anchored in self-determined intent. Days afterward, I found myself embracing small rebellions against the automatic currents pulling me away from autonomy. One morning, I deliberately rewrote my schedule, inserting intervals solely dedicated to reflection and personal projects. At first, this provoked discomfort, almost like my nervous system rebelled against the unfamiliar freedom. Yet, as hours passed, I noticed a growing sense of ease and a surge of enthusiasm previously muted. Instead of depleting me, this shift sparked a sense of renewal, like opening a window to fresh air after long confinement. Conversations with close friends further illuminated this unfolding insight. One recounted his experience of setting firm boundaries at work, refusing to be available outside of designated hours. Initially met with resistance, his stance eventually won respect and, importantly, restored his mental clarity. Witnessing his transformation underscored that claiming space in daily life cultivates fertile ground for regained vitality, not through external confrontation but through internal reordering. Meanwhile, I experimented with different rituals to reinforce my newfound intent. Embracing mindful pauses before responding to unexpected requests became a tool to disrupt habitual reactivity. This brief moment to check in with myself before agreeing or declining offered an empowering sense of agency. Over time, these pauses accumulated, crafting a buffer against automatic drift and opening avenues to align actions with authentic desires. Another insight surfaced during an unexpected moment sitting alone at a park bench under a sprawling oak. Observing the tree's steady growth year after year, impervious to shifting seasons and external disturbance, I saw a metaphor for resilience grounded in rootedness. The oak did not resist the wind with brute force. It yielded subtly while maintaining core strength. This balance of flexibility and firmness inspired me to cultivate a similar relationship with my own autonomy, asserting control not rigidly, but fluidly, adapting while holding true to myself. Through these experiences, I discovered that reclaiming internal governance isn't an act confined to monumental decisions, but unfolds through consistent micro-choices consciously made. It thrives in the seamless integration of acceptance and initiative, fostering an environment where masculine vitality can flourish naturally. Now, take a moment to reflect on your own landscape. Where have you gradually ceded influence in the unfolding of your days? Which seemingly trivial concessions might be crafting patterns of quiet submission? Recognizing these openings is the vital first step in reconstructing a daily rhythm aligned with your core. Small shifts in your responses can realign the tempo of your inner world, eventually cascading into broader revitalization. At this crossroads, I'm reminded that genuine leadership, over oneself and one's life, blossoms from recognizing these subtle dynamics and purposefully steering through them, cultivating vigor and presence not by force but through attentive practice. This understanding conveys a profound message. Restoring masculine power is not about breaking chains with tumult but weaving a new fabric of internal coherence, thread by thread. Your journey has its unique textures, and by honoring where control lies, you begin to reclaim the pulse that fuels enduring strength. One afternoon, I found myself wandering through an old bookstore tucked away from the bustling streets, drawn by the musty scent of aging pages and whispered stories. Amid the shelves, my fingers grazed a worn leather-bound journal left open as if inviting me in. As I flipped through, a passage caught my attention, a reflection on the subtle erosion of drive not through external defeat but through internal acquiescence. It struck a chord I hadn't fully articulated before. This wasn't simply about fatigue or willpower. It was a conversation between my physiology and my choices, spoken in a language of diminishing returns. Suddenly, I recalled a recent moment at work, a subtle exchange that seemed trivial but illuminated this dynamic sharply. My manager assigned a project without consulting me, assuming compliance. Instead of defaulting to yes, I caught myself hesitating. The old habit was immediate submission, to nod and proceed. But hesitance suggested something altering beneath the surface. That hesitation was the surface ripple of an internal recalibration, a quiet pushback reclaiming agency. It was as if my instinct whispered, "Pause, weigh this." This tiny act of self-interruption carved out a fissure in months of automatic conformity, opening a sluice for renewed intentionality. This experience underscored how crucial it is to recognize the micro-moments where our instincts gather strength. Often, vitality fades not in grand gestures but in these incremental surrenders. When I consistently allowed routine to dictate my reactions, the internal system interpreted my passivity as invitation to conserve resources. Conversely, each choice to assert, even with timid steps, reoriented the internal architecture, encouraging neuronal pathways to light up with fresh potential. One evening, I shared this revelation with a close friend who'd grappled similarly with silent burnout. He painted a vivid picture. His days had become rivers whose banks he no longer shaped. Instead, he floated along, resigned to currents carrying him toward destinations mapped by others. It was this sensation, loss of navigational control, that thinned his reserves. Inspired by this, we devised an experiment. Each agreed to spearhead a simple, non-negotiable decision daily. Whether ordering meals, setting workout times, or carving out no zones in social commitments. Initially awkward, these small realms of sovereignty grew into sources of revitalization, awakening dormant enthusiasm. I observed shifting energy patterns manifest physically. Alertness sharpened, posture straightened, and an undercurrent of expectation shifted from fatigue to anticipation. It was as if the body, long habituated to conserve, now readjusted to mobilize. This transformation wasn't instantaneous but evolved gradually, calibrated by my increasingly deliberate engagement in everyday opportunities to lead myself. The phenomenon became clearer during a weekend retreat I attended, designed to explore boundaries and personal power. During a guided exercise, our facilitator asked us to describe the fortress protecting our autonomy. For many, it resembled walls imposing isolation or rigidity. When I examined mine, I realized it wasn't walls but fragile bridges, small connections where I'd allowed others' preferences to dictate my rhythm. With each consent given more out of habit than choice, a beam weakened, compromising the structure's integrity. Acknowledging this vulnerability broke open a doorway to reconstruction, one founded on selective bridging, connecting authentically without sacrificing self-determination. Conversations at the retreat deepened this insight. Another participant shared how reclaiming control wasn't about confrontations but about sculpting boundaries like an artist molds clay. Fluid, nuanced, responsive. His example of declining a lengthy family obligation to prioritize mental rest revealed an elegant dance between respect and insistence, challenging me to reconsider my own definitions of strength. Could power reside not in relentless striving but in conscious restraint? Returning home, I tested these ideas immediately. Faced with the habitual urgency to multitask, I deliberately slowed my pace, choosing a single task and dedicating undivided focus. This shift fractured the compulsive whirlwind that had dictated my days. While colleagues buzzed from one demand to another, I felt anchored, steady, as if claiming ground formerly abdicated. Surprisingly, this calmness fueled momentum rather than stifling it, undermining assumptions equating busyness with productivity. Delving deeper, I experimented with environmental cues supporting autonomy. Small modifications, rearranging my workspace, setting personal alarms signaling breaks, even playing music aligned with my mood, served as reminders that my presence was active, not passive. These intentional alterations acted as signals to my body and mind, reinforcing that control was reclaimed internally despite external variability. Throughout this evolving landscape, one realization crystallized powerfully. Autonomy thrives when nurtured with compassion rather than judgment. Some days I faltered, slipping back into old patterns of unquestioning response. Instead of berating myself, I used those moments as feedback signposts directing where renewed mindfulness was required. This gentle attentiveness, rather than harsh critique, proved the scaffolding supporting sustained transformation. I also discovered the importance of narrative reframing. Instead of viewing autonomy as a burdensome obligation to fight for control, I embraced it as a liberating gift, an ongoing dialogue between intention and circumstance. This shift in mindset eased resistance, allowing me to welcome challenges as invitations to exercise self-governance rather than threats undermining it. Now, consider how these nuances play out when navigating daily routines packed with unchosen tasks or the constant pull to conform. What tiny acts might interrupt automatic compliance for you? Could pausing before replying or rearranging a habitual schedule become doorways to reinvest your inner vitality? Sometimes, the most potent rebellion isn't loud defiance but the deliberate act of choosing your own next step, however small. This isn't simply an intellectual insight. It's a lived experience, a recalibration of mind and body harmonizing in concert. Through these lived moments, I learned that vitality emerges when I craft a personal ecosystem honoring intentional choice in each thread of daily existence. A mosaic of agency layered quietly beneath the surface yet powerful enough to reshape my experience from within. Reflecting on this journey so far, I find myself navigating through a landscape shaped as much by unseen currents as by the paths I've consciously chosen. It's as though layers of experience and awareness have intertwined quietly, forming a tension between inertia and movement, submission and stewardship. The thread connecting these moments isn't always evident at first glance. Yet it hums persistently, inviting a deeper reckoning with how energy responds to subtle shifts in our relationship with ourselves. I recall walking along a dimly lit street one evening, the air heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth, when this very tension became almost palpable. The city around me pulsed with a restless energy, people hurrying, conversations overlapping, lives running on autopilot or urgency. But inwardly, I felt a different rhythm, a slow unraveling of a habitual cadence that had long dictated my responses and drained my vitality. It was as if the familiar refrain of "just go along" was dissolving, leaving open a space both daunting and filled with quiet possibility. In that moment, awareness settled like a gentle weight on my chest. Not a burden, but a summons. Throughout this unfolding, I noticed how our bodies and minds do not operate in isolation but engage in an ongoing dialogue. Energy ebbs and flows in synchronicity with the degree of authorship we reclaim from the very small choices that lace our days. These choices might seem inconsequential, pausing before a reply, opting for stillness amid noise, or redirecting focus when weariness nudges us toward disengagement. But their cumulative force reverberates like ripples expanding outward. This subtle physics of vitality is less about sudden bursts than about sustaining an undercurrent powerful enough to carry us forward. There is a curious dance at play when we begin to challenge internalized rhythms shaped by obligation rather than intention. It's not a clash but a negotiation, a recalibration of the compass guiding our movements. I have felt moments when hesitation transforms from hesitation into a gateway, signaling a shift from programmed reactivity toward conscious initiation. These liminal spaces between old reflexes and new responses feel charged with tension, an electric anticipation that both unsettles and awakens. Like a dark seam in the earth preparing to let light through, they herald transformation. I share this because such tensions are not signs of weakness but rather of emerging strength. They mark the churning that precedes growth, the necessary discomfort of expanding boundaries and redefining what it means to steward one's energy and presence. It's in these charged pauses where the quiet forging of authentic power occurs, where the nervous system learns to hold steadiness amid uncertainty, and the mind cultivates patience with its own unfolding process. The journey itself becomes a teacher, offering lessons encoded in sensation and awareness rather than words alone. It strikes me how this intimate revolution, often so subtle, can feel both solitary and profoundly connected. There is a kind of invisible thread weaving through these moments, an acknowledgement that we are not isolated in our responses and adaptations, but part of a larger pattern reflecting the collective experience of reclaiming agency over dispersed fragments of self. The reclamation does not occur through grand spectacle, but through a series of deliberate acts, each sending a pulse of intent that gradually rewrites the narrative of exhaustion and passivity into one of engaged presence. As I continued forward, I perceived how attentiveness functions as a kind of alchemy, turning the ordinarily overlooked into portals of transformation. By leaning into awareness during times that might otherwise slip by unnoticed, I began to glimpse the contours of a path that winds through uncertainty toward renewed vigor. Awareness itself became a form of movement, a pilgrimage across landscapes of habituated response toward more grounded embodiment of will. The interplay between resistance and surrender grew clearer, revealing an intricate balance akin to the way rivers carve canyons over eons. Persistent, patient, shaping profound change through countless small gestures. This fluid negotiation between tension and release underscored how vitality is not a commodity to be seized forcibly, but a natural flourish arising when we honor ourselves with space to breathe, decide, and lead. It is not a race but a rhythm, a dance with time and inclination. In this evolving dance, every subtle shift holds significance, as if the very act of choosing each moment sends a signal to the body's deepest registers that we intend to move with purpose. And in that intention, the dormant reservoirs start to stir, calling forth an energy long set aside. It is not instantaneous, nor is it always easy. The steps forward sometimes falter, the ground unsettles, yet the arc bends invariably toward reclamation. Now, as the journey draws close to a turning point, these threads of recognition, tension, and nascent strength converge into a dynamic field of potential. The space we inhabit expands, inviting us to step fully into the emerging narrative. That moment, shimmering just ahead, holds the promise of what it means to live not merely in response but in authorship, marking a threshold where inner alignment and outward action converge. We stand on the cusp of something forthcoming, an unfolding that calls for a final embrace of a deeper truth, waiting patiently to be voiced. I once found myself standing at the edge of a quiet lake just as dusk was settling in, the sky bleeding soft tones of violet and amber. Around me, the world felt suspended, holding its breath in a fragile balance between day and night. I traced my fingertips along the cool, still water, noticing how the lake mirrored everything above it: clouds, trees, the fading light. Yet it remained calm, steady, absorbing reflections without disturbance. In that stillness, I recognized a truth that had been quietly maturing within me. Energy, purpose, and vitality are deep wells in us, capable of being stirred awake when we stop surrendering our will and start inviting life to unfold under our own guidance. The journey toward rekindling this inner fire is far from dramatic upheaval or forceful resistance. It resembles more a patient awakening, like the gentle unfolding of a flower in spring or the slow turning of a key in an ancient lock. I realized that when I give space for intentional presence, choosing even the smallest decisions with awareness, I am coaxing my whole being to align with an inner rhythm built on trust and authorship. It's a rhythm that honors our capacity to sculpt the contours of our experience through deliberate attention. What struck me most deeply during this period was the way my body, mind, and spirit seemed to converse in a newly clear language, a dialect shaped by moments where I paused, looked inward, and reclaimed fragments of autonomy that had once slipped through my fingers unnoticed. Each choice became a quiet declaration. I am here. I steer my path. This internal dialogue unfolded like a rare symphony, composed not in grand gestures, but in understated notes, recurring and resonant. It taught me that vitality is less about external accomplishments and more an intimate weaving of presence, control, and surrender to what demands our authenticity. Sometimes, I caught myself slipping back into old patterns, lulled by the illusion of convenience in relinquishing control. Yet even those instances served as invitations, gentle bends in the road urging me to pay closer attention, to recognize what drains versus what renews. Embracing imperfections and vulnerabilities didn't diminish my resolve. Rather, it infused the process with compassion and patience. I came to see that mastery over one's energy is a lifelong dance rather than a fixed state. Each return to presence is a victory, each mindful choice a renewal of strength. There were evenings when the weight of external expectations pressed heavily, threatening to pull me into automatic responses. In those times, I reminded myself how the quiet allowance of autonomy is a radical act. It whispers back to our nervous system the message that we are worthy of energy, deserving of engagement, and capable of guiding our own momentum. This message, when internalized, shifts the tides within, coaxing the dormant reservoirs of vigor to awaken and flow freely again. Over the months, as I nurtured this inner sovereignty, my landscape of experience transformed. Moments became stitches in a larger tapestry, each connection between intention and action folding into a cohesive narrative of self-trust. I learned that reclaiming control is not about overwhelming others or rejecting life's demands entirely, but about honoring the boundaries between our influence and what lies beyond. In doing so, I found a profound freedom not defined by external measures, but by the integrity of my own engagement. Now, when faced with the familiar pull of reactive living, I strive to return to that lakeside stillness within, the calm surface that reflects but does not capitulate, the quiet strength that arises from grounding oneself in conscious choice. As I trace each decision, from the subtle to the significant, I am reminded that this is how energy thrives, through the deliberate reclamation of authority over our own lives. I invite you to consider where your own waters have grown turbulent or stagnated, where habitual surrender may have gently leached your vitality. There is an extraordinary power in the act of turning attention inward and choosing anew, no matter how small the shift. To reclaim your narrative isn't to wage a war, but to become a steward of your own unfolding story, weaving together intention and action with the patience of tending something sacred. If there is one affirmation I carry with me from this journey, it is this: living with integrity over our choices, cultivating connection to our inner compass, is how we awaken the deepest wells of energy inside us. Every deliberate moment lived fully is an invitation to transform. And so, even as the world around us spins relentless and fast, we hold the capacity to create a stillness within that empowers us to walk forward on our own terms, strong, vibrant, and undeniably alive.